Welcome to Limitless, the BlindBeginnings podcast where seeing things differently inspires limitless possibilities. This podcast is being brought to you by BlindBeginnings, an organization based in Vancouver, Canada, that supports children and youth who are blind or partially sighted, along with their families. Limitless was created in order to inform, educate, entertain, and share stories from within the blind and partially sighted community in order to show the world that the opportunities for those who are blind or partially sighted are truly limitless. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to your host, the Executive Director and founder of BlindBeginnings, Shawn Marcellet.
Welcome back to Limitless, the BlindBeginnings podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Marcellet. We have a special episode today. We haven't done one of these in a while. It's our Ask A.B.B.Y, and A.B.B.Y stands for A BlindBeginnings Youth. And I had to do the math there, 3. How many people do I have with me today? I have 3 young youth type people. I know they're all not exactly youth anymore, but more youth than I am. Joining me today, I have Keisha, Nika, and Kolby. Welcome back to the podcast, ladies.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
So I've got some questions for you. These questions come from anybody and anywhere. So people can always email in questions to limitless@blindbeginnings.ca, and we save them up. And then whenever we have enough questions, we run an Ask A.B.B.Y episode. And it's a great way to educate people and get some of those questions answered that you might have about blindness and visual impairment. Okay, so some of the questions I feel like we might just have one person answer. Other questions you might all have a different answer. So we'll just kind of see how we do here. Number 1, how do you read websites? Keisha, how do you read websites?
One of 2 ways typically, either on my computer or on my phone. And if it's on my computer, I'm using a screen reader software. I'm using NVDA currently, but also JAWS works. And on my phone, I use an iPhone, so I use VoiceOver. And it's also a screen reading software, but for the phone.
Pretty similar with me. I prefer the touchscreen method. So I do most of my kind of internet research on my phone or iPad using VoiceOver. And it's really easy because I can just scroll with one finger and double click on whatever I need to use. And then I also have a computer. And since I get it through school, then I use JAWS on it. And then I also have a MacBook, and MacBooks also use VoiceOver, which is built in as well.
All right, we'll move on to number 2. How do you print Braille?
Ooh.
Great question. I'm not very tech savvy on how that works, so I'm going to let one of you take it.
So printing Braille, there's a couple of ways I can explain this. So you can use what's called a Brailler, and there's different types of Braillers. So some Braillers, you would type what you want into the Brailler. You would Braille out what you're writing, and it would come out on your piece of paper as you're Brailing it. Or there's other types called electronic Braille, where you would do it on your computer, and then it would print out in Braille. And in this case, it might be a tactile Braille, or it could be visual Braille.
And in terms of what Kolby was saying about the Brailler, it's kind of an old-fashioned device. It kind of resembles like a typewriter, if you've ever seen one of those. And so it's kind of big and clunky, but I know I think I can speak for us. I think we've all had experiences with it. For me, I used it a lot for math in school, and for a lot of other things when I was quite a bit younger. Yeah. So, and then in terms of like when you're doing Braille on like a computer or a Braille note taker device, like Kolby was describing, there is a machine called a Braille embosser, which is essentially a printer, but it will print out Braille, which is kind of cool. But yeah, there's more to it, but that's kind of the gist.
It's also very loud and very scary if you're hearing it for the first time.
The Braille embosser, yeah.
Yeah, it scared me.
Awesome. Yeah. So it kind of depends how much Braille, right? Like nobody talked about the slate and stylus, which is sort of the
Yes.
really old fashioned, like
the pencil of Braille.
pen. Exactly. I always say pen and paper.
Yeah, that I use more for like to-do list kind of stuff, like making a to-do list or schedule. And then like the embosser, like my school used mostly for like chemistry worksheets and like French worksheets.
And sometimes bigger like books. If books are being printed in Braille, they'd use an embosser. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Number 3, why do canes that people who are blind use have different ends?
Well, there's different types of cane tips because depending on where you're traveling, you might want a cane tip that if you're walking in a rough area, like maybe a forest or somewhere that's got lots of bumps and rocks and roots, you want a tip that's nice and big so it's not going to get stuck in all the dirt and roots and rocks. Or maybe you're just walking on the sidewalk. So in that case, you can use a smaller tip. And it's also a personal preference. I think each person will have one that they prefer. Some roll and some don't. Some are better if you're just tapping your cane, and some are better if you want to roll your cane around.
I remember in our white cane stories episode, I kind of poked fun at the pencil tip because I really don't like it. And I think Monty kind of explained that that's better for 2-point touch or like when you're tapping the cane, whereas I do more of the constant contact, like constantly rolling it on the ground. So I prefer the rolling tip for that because I also find the thinner pencil tip gets stuck in cracks.
Mm.
Yes.
Nothing like a cane getting you right in the gut.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, and I remember when I went to like outdoor camps with school, I had like a giant red ball at the end of my cane.
Oh, a red ball.
Yes.
Like the Jeep of cane tips.
Yeah.
I had that too.
Awesome. Okay, great answer. Thank you. Okay, number 4, how do you learn the location of keys on a keyboard? I'm assuming we're talking about typing, like a computer keyboard, but I guess it could also be a piano keyboard, any kind of keyboard. So how do you figure out which keys are which?
I can remember being like when I was probably in my earlier years of elementary school when we were kind of learning computer stuff, mainly just being like familiarized with the keyboard, with like the I remember being heavily discouraged from hunt and peck because that is a fairly visual thing to do, that's when you're just using your 2 index fingers and you're just going dee 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 like all over the keyboard, which a lot of people do apparently. But I was like heavily discouraged from that and told to like place my fingers like along the home row of the keyboard so that the one that says I don't know how would we explain that, the one right below the QWERTY row.
I think people know what the home row is, but it's
like the J and the F are like kind of labeled.
Yeah, they have little.
Oh, that's it too. Yeah, I kind of forgot about that. Yeah, so I don't know. It's like for me, it was a case of memorization, but I'm interested to know what you guys think.
Similar. I mean, a couple of them, like the numbers or like the function keys, I'll put like a couple like stickers on just so I don't have to keep counting like 1, 2, 3, 4.
That too. Yeah. Actually, you want to know a weird, funny story about this?
Yeah, we do.
When I was like, my very first cell phone was a flip phone, but it had a tiny little keyboard. I don't know if you guys have seen those.
Yep.
Yeah. And it that actually really helped me learn the keyboard for the laptop, because it was like it was really small and easy to figure out, and then you're texting up a storm to your friends, and then before you know it, it's transferring over to the keyboard.
Wow. Yeah. Way back in my day, we had to I learned on like typing tutor, and it literally starts you with F and J, and you're just doing like FFF space JJJ space FJF space JFJ, and then it introduces the next two letters and the next.
That.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So by the time you go through that whole program, you've memorized a few letters at a time until you've memorized all the letters. I always say to people, sighted people aren't supposed to look at the keys. They just do, right? Like your fingers are over top of them. Really, it's not designed for you to look at them. So blind people we're just typing the proper way.
You get really familiar with where the keys are, and then you just memorize.
Can you fall asleep with your eyes open?
I certainly cannot.
Cannot either.
Yeah, neither can I.
Yeah, me either. And honestly, I don't know because I'm asleep. So
I mean,
also, like,
can I get a little like scientific here?
Sure.
So when you're asleep, basically your like kind of nervous system relaxes. So it's actually physically impossible for you to be able to like sleep with your eyes open, like under typical circumstances.
Interesting.
Oh,
well,
that is
I was
interesting.
I was just thinking about how dry, like if you don't have prosthetics anyway, how dry your eyes would get from just having them open. Like I can't do a staring contest for more than a few minutes.
That's true. Okay.
Yeah.
When you are traveling, how do you know where you are?
So it really differs for me on like in different circumstances. Sometimes I've practiced a certain route a lot of times, and so I'm quite familiar with where I am just based on landmarks that I've figured out for myself, or and then that could be like tactile indicators underfoot, or a cane if you're using that, or your dog. There's certain things they do, or it's something that I hear, so landmarks could be a lot of different things. So it could be a route that I've practiced a lot, like the route to my university or to a friend's house, or to my own home, etc. But sometimes, and then those for me are like, I'm probably the most relaxed when I'm going to the places that I've practiced going to. But if it's someplace new, there's a few different ways. Like, I mean, I use like the map app on iPhone quite a bit that kind of helps me figure out where I am. Also, like, just like if somebody's like, hey, there's, can you meet me at this place? There's going to be like a grocery store over here. So then if I'm doing that, like then, and there's supposed to be a grocery store down the block, on the left side of the block, if I'm facing it, then maybe I'm like, okay, I'm listening for shopping carts or something, and that's going to be an indicator that there's a grocery store down there or something like that. Or maybe my dog walks past automatic doors and they whoosh open, and okay, that's probably the grocery store or something like that. Sometimes I'll ask people for directions if I don't know exactly where I am. I know the other day I was taking a new bus route that I'd never taken before, but I knew that I was heading to a part of town where there was this particular business. And so I said, hey, I asked the driver, hey, is this business on the right side of the street or the left side of the street? And that'll help me orient where I am. And the driver didn't know, but somebody at the back of the bus heard, and they knew. So they called down the bus and told me, and that actually really helped. But so there's a few different ways you can kind of approach that sort of thing. And then actually, sometimes if I'm really struggling, I remember one time being really lost on a trip one time, and I thankfully had cell service, so I FaceTimed one of my friends and I was like, what do you see? And then they told me what they saw, and I was like, oh. But anyway, so there's a lot of different ways to problem solve through that, in my opinion.
It's funny, I was thinking about just familiar routes, and just sighted people probably have landmarks. I remember asking my mom once, how do you know when to turn down our back alley to go to our house? And she thought that was a pretty bizarre question, because of course she just knows, right? But I'm like, what do you look for? Like, how do you know? And there's just things you do automatically. You turn at the yellow house, or whatever. And it's the same for us. It's just non-visual. So it might be like, oh yeah, there's this pole here, or there's a tree that overhangs that always kind of like brushes the top of my head as I walk under it, or there's a brick wall
until they prune it.
Yes. Yeah. Certain times a year that tree hits me in the face, actually, which I'm not a fan of. Or like you'll hear a bus shelter because it's like the sort of alcovey sound as you walk by, or things like that. So
I think the thing is I'm great in familiar areas that I've done, and then in unfamiliar areas, I either have to go with an orientation and mobility specialist beforehand, or when I'm with a friend, I always like memorize the route. I kind of joke that Clement's like my honorary O&M instructor. He's not qualified, but he's great. And yeah, and I just find that like the map app, for example, doesn't tell me like when I should cross or when I should turn, and that's kind of my thing I struggle with intersections, is like, how do I know if I should cross or like turn left? So usually like I kind of found that certain apps like Microsoft Soundscape, or even the Seeing Eye has a GPS app, and it actually will tell you like exactly when to turn, and it'll tell you how far you are from an intersection or a street. And I found that really helpful, and I used it when I went to the island a couple weeks ago.
Something else
that's cool
that I do if I have to go somewhere I've never been is I've had friends that are sighted look at Google Maps or Google Earth, or I don't know how they do it, but they can like view the block that I'm going to be. So, I know I have to turn left and walk 3 blocks, but it's like partway down the block. So they'll be able to tell me, well, you're going to cross over a couple driveways. Well, exactly how many driveways. And then, walk a little bit further and it might be on your right. And I've used that to figure out how to find something. And it actually works pretty well.
That's smart. I never thought of that.
Me neither.
So you got to I'm memorizing it. So hopefully it's not too complicated. Because you don't really want to be like having to read notes as you're walking. But I do find, so I'm old fashioned, I will still call for transit directions, and I'll ask the bus driver, okay, so the address I'm trying to get to, when I get off the bus, am I walking back? Is that the, what, such and such a street? And then do I need to turn left or right, or which side of the street am I like? And they'll generally give you some pretty good directions too. But if you want more precise, get a friend to look at, like, how are you going to be crossing some driveways, or how many blocks do you have to walk? That was before there was GPS, but I still use those. Next question. Are Apple products easier to use for people who are blind?
Well, easier than what?
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking that. Are we saying, is Apple easier than Android, or are we saying, are Apple products easier to use than for blind people than for sighted people? Like, I'm not really sure.
I mean, like, they have the built-in kind of voiceover, like we mentioned before. So they're kind of like the automatically basically accessible.
Right.
I think that what I would say for myself is, like, in terms of phones, I haven't really spent a lot of time with Android, so it could be with some time I could figure it out maybe. But I find the accessibility on iPhones is really good. But for me, I prefer like a Windows PC laptop to a Mac.
I think that Android phones also now have built-in voiceover equivalent, right? So now a smartphone is pretty accessible across the board, but Apple was the first to have something. And I would say the majority of blind people have chosen Apple, but that might be changing.
I think from what I've heard is kind of Android is good if you're really techie and like doing a lot of customization options, like fancy things that I don't understand.
Me too.
So if you want more details on Apple versus Android, you can actually check out episode 31 of the podcast, where we talked at great length about that, specifically in terms of accessibility for people who are blind. All right. Next question. This is a good one. How long does it take to learn Braille? Is it hard? Double barrel question. Yeah, I think you can each answer this question.
I can. For me, it's kind of like I compare it to learning print. So whenever in kindergarten, my class would be working on writing or learning letters and numbers, I would be with my vision teacher and I'd learn Braille. And I kind of learned basically how to write Braille the same time as everyone else learned how to write print. And I learned the different punctuation the same time that we were taught punctuation, like the entire class. And then contractions came later in grade 1, 2, and 3. And that's kind of something gradually we started working into our lessons, like with my vision teacher. And for me, it came like pretty naturally, I'd say, just because I wasn't learning print at the same time. I learned how to read print when I was 3 or 4 because my mom taught me. So I kind of knew like the letter and like grammatical kind of rules, like the very basic bare bones of it.
Gosh, I think that I have a very similar experience to Nika in terms of learning Braille, because I also knew like the basic alphabet in print before I ever came to school. And then when I got to school and I had a significant enough visual impairment that my vision teacher and whatnot were like, yep, that you need to learn Braille. So I think what I remember, right, like early years, like kindergarten, like grade 1, probably like kindergarten, I think, was like just simply first being exposed to Braille, like pages of Braille, being made to like learn how to do finger positioning, how to like tracking with like the left index, and then reading with the right hand. And now that's kind of melded into me reading kind of half the page with one hand, half the page with the other. And some people ask me, they're like, are you reading backwards? And I'm like, no, I just do half and half. But anyway, so I remember like being exposed to just I guess getting used to like computing the tactile bumps with something that I would be reading. And then from there, it was a case of identifying, the difference between the bump configurations. And then it was time to learn the alphabet and then eventually move into contractions. And I think similar to Nika, like I started learning contractions, grade probably 2 into grade 3. I think I knew most of it by grade 3 because that's when I was starting to like read chapter books and stuff like that quite rigorously. So,
well, for me, it's a little bit different. So, like you guys in kindergarten, grade 1, I learned the alphabet, the print alphabet, with my class, and then because my vision, like I could still see quite a lot. I didn't end up learning the Braille alphabet until grade 2. And so by that point, I already knew what all the written letters looked like. So I learned the alphabet and just being able to recognize the different letters in Braille. And I did that in probably grade 2 and grade 3. And I didn't really learn a lot of contractions then. I just mainly learned the alphabet. And then because my vision was quite stable, I never really learned any more Braille until I started losing more, and that was a lot later. So I didn't actually finish learning the Braille code until I was in high school. And that's in probably grade 11 is when I went back and continued learning all the contractions and the rules and all of what was needed so that I could be able to participate and really read my textbooks and whatnot in school. So for me, it was a little bit different.
Kolby, because you kind of learned a lot of it later, was it hard?
I thought so, yeah.
Right.
And I mean, in looking back, I think I learned it all within about a year, but it was definitely like a full-time course that I was doing on top of all the other academic courses I was doing.
Yeah. Interesting. Keisha, I'm curious the way you're describing reading Braille with two hands, because I am a one finger, like the equivalent of hunt and peck for typing is how I read Braille.
I'm the same.
And I numb out the one finger and then I switch to the other one, the other pointer finger. Anyways, I'm just curious, are you reading with multiple fingers on each hand?
Oh man, now I have to think about it. Okay, let's see. Sometimes I read like so primarily I'm reading with the index fingers, but sometimes I think I also incorporate
sneak
like
some
the
letters
middle
under
finger.
the other one.
Yeah, the little middle finger. It depends on like how fast I need to absorb this material.
Yeah,
but
cool.
yeah, so that I think sometimes it's a couple of them.
So the left hand comes to the middle and the right hand meets it in the middle. And then the left hand is going back to the start of the next line as the right hand is reading the second half of the first line.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
exactly.
Yeah, that's very cool. I am definitely not that kind of reader.
Yeah, me too. I actually read one-handed, and I read with my left hand, mostly my pointer. My other fingers come along, but they don't really read very much.
Right.
And then they go across and then they go down. It's definitely slower, but yeah.
Number 9. Do you feel like you relate to people differently because of your blindness?
Wow, that's deep.
I would say that I can relate to people who have gone through challenges and have to overcome barriers a lot easier because I have had to. And I feel like I've also had to problem solve. So I feel like you can relate to other people that have to figure out other ways of doing things.
I think that I really like how you answered that, Kolby. I think, because that's very interesting because it depends. For me, I think it's like sometimes I try really hard to not always think about the blindness part of my life first. And I think it definitely comes up a lot and it definitely causes a lot of challenges and problem solving opportunities and also opportunities to do things creatively and differently, which is cool. I mean, seeing things differently. But I also try to relate, with people just on the level of being human and the level of, activities that we share in common or, things that we're passionate about and things like that. And I really try to relate to as many people as possible in different ways. Cause I really like to try to meet people where they're at.
I think naturally I also kind of tend to gravitate more towards people who are also blind and visually impaired because they have kind of the lived experience. And then typically I find that people who have maybe other things they're dealing with, like maybe they have dealt with racism or maybe they're, different because of their sexuality or gender identity, I find I'm more empathetic and I'm very open-minded. I'm not sure how much of that has to do with my disability specifically and how much of that has to do with just that's how my personality is naturally.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about how would I answer this, and certainly there are things I would have a hard time being able to relate to, like maybe the experience of driving in traffic. I mean, I know what it's like to be in traffic as the sighted person. And when people are driving and they're being angry at the traffic or at drivers, I'm sort of like, I have a hard time relating to that because I'm like, but I don't have to be on a bus right now. So, and we're comfortable and we're dry and we can listen to the radio and eat snacks. And, you know, like there's a lot of benefits to just being in a vehicle in the first place. So it doesn't impact me in the same way. So I don't know. There's probably some experiences that people have had that I haven't. And then there's experiences that I've had that they haven't, and they might have trouble relating to me. So, but it's not just about blindness. It's the whole package, right? It's all of your lived experience, but it's a really interesting question.
That your little anecdote about driving made me think about I remember sitting with some friends, and they saw something something that was happening in our near vicinity that they were like, oh my gosh, like you should be really glad you didn't just see that. Like that was really off-putting. And it made me think to myself, like, yeah, I guess people with sight like see some off-putting things and they have to just deal with that image now. Like
mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Like gory stuff on TV.
Yeah. I mean, I joke sometimes and I'll say, well, I never have to see anything I don't want to see.
Yeah, so it's true.
Oh yeah, like one of my swim coaches and I were joking about that a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, the question is, what do guide dogs do? How do they know where you want to go?
Hey, you can check out our
resident expert.
All of us who are here can talk about guide dogs to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, well, for the record, Kolby has been a guide dog handler far longer than me and is much wiser. But I have been working a dog for a year now, and I hear him clicking by in the hallway right now. Anyway, so basically, how does a guide dog know where you're going? Well, so the thing that you have to understand about guide dogs is it is not the guide dog's job to do everything and be a machine. The guide dog's job is to listen to you as the handler because you're a team. And when you command your dog, who has been specifically trained to, and you've been trained with them at the beginning of your partnership to understand what the commands that they've been trained to understand and the ways that they've been trained to understand them. So then when you begin to work a guide dog, you are in charge of knowing where you're going. You can't whisper in your dog's ear and say, hey, go to the grocery store. And they'll just be like, right on, I know one down the street. You've got to plan the route in your mind, just like you would with a cane or if you're walking or driving your car. And you have to be prepared and you have to know where you're going, because essentially you're going to tell your dog things like, go forward, go left, go right. And their job is to guide you around obstacles so that you don't have an accident or an injury. And they're also in charge of stopping when there's traffic and things like that, so that you don't get hit by a car or things like that. But it's also up to you to still be paying attention to your surroundings, still be alert, because also dogs make mistakes. So that's your own caution is the second line of defense for your well-being. So that's essentially how I would describe working with a dog.
I think you explained that really well. I think it's quite a misunderstanding about how guide dogs work. I've definitely had people ask me or think that a dog just knows where I want to go and will take me there, and that's not the case. Like Keisha says, it's up to the handler and the team together to be able to get to each place that they want to go together and independently. And so it's just as important for me with using a guide dog to know how to get somewhere as it is if you're using a cane.
One of the things that I think is pretty cool that guide dogs do is the sort of disobedience on purpose. I think there's a name for it. So like if you tell the dog,
it's called Keisha,
Is it called it's called selective disobedience, or I can't
I
remember.
thought it was
what it's
called intelligent disobedience.
Yes,
that's the one.
Yes, intelligent disobedience.
disobedience.
Yes. So if you tell the dog to go forward and there's an obstacle, a hole in the ground, something in the way, they'll stop. They won't go.
And it's also something that they'll train the dogs to do if you're at a crosswalk or a street crossing and there's a car coming in for whatever reason. If you don't hear it or you think it's safe to cross and the car is coming, the dog will back up or not cross the street. And it's the same if you're at a subway or a train station and you're getting too close to the train tracks. The dog won't let you walk off the edge where they're not supposed to, for your own safety.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay. I like this question. What is your favorite thing about being blind?
Ooh, this is a good one.
Oh,
I like it.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I'm not pausing because there's not things. There are actually a lot of things I've learned to love about being blind.
Yeah,
it's hard. I can think of a lot of reasons, anywhere from like very deep ones all the way to kind of more surface level ones. But I think one of them would probably be the people I've met. Just because I think if I were sighted, I wouldn't be able to kind of be involved in Blind Beginnings. And people kind of have told me, oh, yeah, but your life would be so much easier. But then the thing is, I value people and relationships more than physically just being able to live my life. And I'm still able to live my life being visually impaired. And I think some of my closest friends are blind and visually impaired. So I think kind of without that, I don't know if I'd ever stumble across them or be able to meet them. And they're amazing people, not because of their like disability, just personality wise. And I don't think I'd ever know them. So probably that.
That's nice.
I think for me, excuse me, I really agree with Nika. Like, kind of learning to see people on a deeper level, like see past the surface level stuff, which I know sounds kind of cliche, but I find it really is the case a lot of the time. The other thing is like creative problem solving has become like such and like problem solving on your feet. Like what a great skill that we all kind of have no choice but to learn. And then for me, the other thing is, and I don't know if this is like a personality thing or like, but I think that sighted people, a lot of people know this, like they've felt this skill as well, or this, trait or whatever, but being able to, like learning how to reframe, really uncomfortable or not the best experiences into like learning opportunities and like adventures even. Like, of course, that's not the case all the time. Like sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm done with all these challenges, but sometimes it's like, okay, this is actually kind of cool. And I just learned something quite valuable today. Like, so that's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah.
Well, I would have to agree. For me, honestly, like meeting the people that I've met, and being able or not being able, I guess, to judge them based on surface level appearance and whatnot is really great. And I think it's allows me to really meet people and just get to know them for them and not for any other kind of bias. And I just, all the opportunities I guess I've had, if I wasn't blind or if I hadn't lost my vision, I wouldn't have the same opportunities that I've had with Blind Beginnings, with school, with the people I met. I wouldn't have a guide dog. Yeah, I think there's a whole lot of great things about being blind, and oftentimes most people don't see those. And I think it's important to be able to share and let people know that there's really some great things about being blind.
I agree.
It's so, you guys are awesome in your very lovely reasons. I'm going to be more superficial.
Yes.
Honestly, the first thing I thought of when I saw the question was a free bus pass. Like, that is very valuable. But anyway, but that's kind of silly. No, I actually really like that. I feel like I'm better. How do I say this? My memory is fantastic. My ability to hear, touch, sense, remember, like just all of that. Like I do, it's not a thing that, it's sort of one of those misconceptions that when you're blind, all your other senses are enhanced, but you do have to use them because you don't have the primary sense of vision. So you do learn and strengthen those other senses over a lifetime of relying on them. So, like I feel like I can smell the flowers that other people don't even notice because maybe they see them, or I can smell that it's going to rain, or I can feel something in the air, or even just like a little bit of intuitiveness or being able to like feel people's emotions, which I just feel like I'm more in tune with my other senses. And that kind of makes me feel like a superhero sometimes. And the ability to find things in the house that the sighted people can't because I'm using my brain and my memory just like gives me such joy. Yeah.
Well, and like, I mean, it's pretty neat being able to bring my dog everywhere.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Where do you buy your canes from, and are they expensive?
Oh Lord, what is the name of the place that we buy canes from?
A.B.B.Y. Yeah. They're like $60 ish, right?
Yeah.
Next question. I don't know if any of you do this. So how do you read music?
Oh, I do actually.
Awesome.
There is Braille music, and it isn't very common. I only know 2 other people who read it, and I learned it because my piano teacher was blind. But there is like Braille music code, and it's not very easy to get Braille music produced. I know that there's certain computer programs which are beyond my scope of understanding. Typically, what I'd have to do is I'd get my music sent out to a guy in Alberta, and he would make my Braille music for me.
Wow. Not super practical. You can't just go to the store and buy the piece that you want to learn.
Yeah, and the thing is, I used it for choral music and piano music. And piano music, it's fine, but with choral music, I could only have my part, because if you were doing a suite of songs in sometimes 11 parts, so if you had 11 parts written out in Braille music, it would just be a huge chapter book.
Right.
I did learn Braille music when I was in band in middle school, but then I discovered this really amazing thing where you use your fingers to play an instrument and you use your fingers to read Braille.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So you have to memorize it anyways. Like you can read it to learn it, but you can't read it while you play in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about choral music.
Right.
True.
Well, I got to say, even piano with my vision, like I did read music with my eyes when I was younger, but I couldn't play and read at the same time because I could only see one line of music at a time, like the right hand or the left hand, not both. So I would have to memorize it anyway. So it's kind of the same idea. Cool. Okay. Our final question. It's a funny one, actually. Okay, it's a good one to end on. What would happen if a guide dog saw a cat? Would they chase it?
That depends on the dog.
Yeah. Richard is my guide dog, and but at the school I got him, they actually have a couple of cats that they have loose in the halls as distractions for the dogs. And since I've had him, he's never tried to go after a cat, thankfully. But there was some dogs when I was there that did try to chase the cats. So I guess it depends on your dog.
Right.
I know, like, when we're training with our dogs, we're trained to kind of interpret the dog behavior when a distraction is present. And that could be a dog distraction, so another dog that our dog wants to interact with, or a human distraction where one of you humans who don't do this, who would come up and try to like pet or call or beckon to the dog. And then there's like food distractions and things like that. But I know often like I've had my guide dog be a little bit distracted by a cat before on harness, actually at the trainings. I went to the same school as Kolby, the seeing eye, and they do have those cats, and those cats are quite bold and they don't care about a thing. And my dog did pull like towards the cat on harness, but I just corrected his behavior, and then he went back to being a good boy. But when he's off harness, he's in love with cats, and he just wants to get right in their face, and he wants to hang out with them. But when he's on harness, he knows it's work time. So
Awesome. I don't think my dog chased cats when I had my guide dog, but I don't know. She was she really liked other dogs though. That was more of the issue.
Yeah. My dog loves other dogs.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for your insight and your wisdom and answering all of these questions. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. And if you have questions, please send an email to limitless@blindbeginnings.ca. We would love to answer your questions in another Ask Abby episode. You've been listening to Limitless, the Blind Beginnings podcast. If you have a question, a comment, a future topic request, please send us an email to limitless@blindbeginnings.ca. Please share our podcast with a friend, like, subscribe, leave us a rating, and join us next time.
This podcast has been brought to you by Blind Beginnings, an organization based in Vancouver, Canada, that supports children and youth who are blind or partially sighted, along with their families. Music for this podcast is composed by Shawn Bishop and Clement Chow. Production and audio editing by Rob Minot. For more information about Blind Beginnings and the work it does to support children and youth who are blind and partially sighted, along with their families, visit us on the web at www.blindbeginnings.ca, and also remember to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.